a difficulty in trying to figure out a chronological order of the verses and so on is involved in the point that the Quran also contains extremely scarce and very slight narrative historical information. And it included in that is the odd fact that it contains nothing which is historically verifiable or falsifiable outside of the Quran. Now, if you say, well, I don't believe in miracles, and the Quran has Moses' staff turn into a serpent, and like the Bible and such things, okay, fine. That you can call, if you want, a counter-scientific indication or something. But if you're coming to look at it from the historical point of view, there isn't anything in it that is historically verifiable or falsifiable. That is because it is not a history book. It is extremely sparing of proper names. For example, there's only one woman's name in the Quran. But does that mean women are named infrequently or are mentioned infrequently? Not at all. They're mentioned very frequently. There must be over 20 women who are described in the Quran, but they aren't given names. And although more of the male prophets are given names, not all of them are. Sometimes it said then a prophet from that people came, and it's just left like that. Even a story which is palpably related to the biblical prophet Samuel, and so Samuel by that would be considered an Islamic prophet, but he's not named in the text. It just says their prophet said, and that's it. The Quran is very sparing on names. Another point, unlike the Bible, is that there's no chronology. The Jewish calendar and its chronology, the Christian calendar of creation with Archbishop Usher saying the world was created in 4004 BC, etc., is elaborated out of the Bible, and all the necessary connections are made to have a continuous chronology. There are no chronologies in the Quran, none. There are mentions of years and numbers of years sometimes, that is true, but they are not put in any kind of chronological form where they seem to matter in that sense. Furthermore, there is no narrative history of the life of the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. There are rarely verses that are sort of datable because of the extra Quranic biography of the Prophet that is in that blue book that you all have by Martin Lings. So, for example, the Surah Al-Fath, Surah 48, is generally associated with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in the year 6. And because that treaty is mentioned, or rather the oath of allegiance to the Prophet is mentioned in the text of Surah 48, that is a very probable instance where the surah can be chronologically fit into the Prophet's life. But generally, if you had only the Quran to go on, and we're going to make a life of the Prophet, that would be completely out of the question. It would hardly be able to do that at all. So this is something then about the overall nature of the text of the Quran. I should add, I suppose, that the Prophet dictated the Quran to scribes, and perhaps especially in the Medinan period when he had more numerous followers, and so there could finally begin to be some specialization and so on. He dictated the Quran to scribes, and then it was written down from that time. It came to be written down as well as being an oral text, but the oral aspect of it is primary over the written aspect. The recited aspect of it, that prevails over the written aspect with no doubt. Now, do you have any questions? Yes?
Maybe this isn't appropriate for the topic, but okay, Muhammad is the messenger.
Yes.
Okay, this is the message.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a different chapter where we're going to be specifically speaking to the message? Because I have a question about that. Is this an appropriate time to ask?
No, why don't you ask anything now? That would be fine.
Okay.
There is another lecture about the life of the Prophet, though, which is also by myself.
Since the topic is the Quran, and this is the message, are I'm going to ask something that might seem mean-spirited, but I don't mean it to be so, okay? This is what I'm wondering. So, if I have the Christian Bible here, I know that a major message is something like, love your enemies. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Can that message be found in here?
That same message.
Or similar? Is that a part of the message from the messenger?
Where it says, love your enemies in so many words? I can't think of any verses that say that directly. But, of course, in the Bible, that is also not the main message of the Bible overall. It is simply a verse that occurs. I mean, you have something like الكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس, which is those who suppress righteous anger and forgive people. And so that is found in a certain verse in the Quran, and that would be somewhat along the lines of what you say. And there are a considerable number of verses that ask for patience.
Can I read you something?
Yes.
There's no mean spirit here, but this was arbitrary, just flipping through a few weeks ago, and I came across this. It says, it is not fitting for the prophet and those who believe that they should pray for forgiveness for pagans, even though they be of kin, after it is clear to them that they are companions of the fire. And Abraham prayed for his father's forgiveness only because of the promise he had made to him. But when it became clear to him that he was an enemy to Allah, he disassociated himself from him.
Okay, so?
Well, I see a tension there, a difference between the Christian book and the Christian message, part of it, in this message. And what I think is a fair question is, am I misreading something?
I think that is not a necessary conclusion. And the reason it would be like this, that the Bible contains various sorts of information and various things. You can find, for example, in Deuteronomy that if a city rebels, destroy it utterly, kill every man, woman, child, and animal in the place, and burn the spoil, because it is not permissible to take any of the spoil since it's filth because of the rebellion of the place, which is seemingly a text trying to discourage rebellion. And yet that exists right there as holy writ for the Christian, even if it is said to be abrogated by the coming of Jesus with his second message, a New Testament, etc. Nevertheless, it still is on the books, and it is unalterably scripture, because the early Christians decided that the Old Testament was scripture, mainly because Jesus had quoted it as scripture, and so it was inescapable that it be viewed that way. And the attempt to get rid of it by Marcion, the Gnostic, who proposed a Bible without the Old Testament, didn't succeed and was branded as a serious heresy. And so the idea that you take texts and quote them out of context doesn't necessarily reflect the ethos of a religion. In the case of Islam, scripturally, you cannot do without the hadith in addition to the Quran. But in order to leave Dr. Shafi his possibility of speaking about the hadith, Dr. Shafi, and according to and to concentrate on the Quran here, I didn't state that. But the hadith is also considered to be kind of a revelation. The hadith is considered certainly to be normative. It is at least quasi-scriptural, or maybe you could call the hadith collections quasi-canonical. In any case, that adds an enormous amount of text also that one must take from. And so you can find various texts that may tend in this way and that way. Now, that's not to say that the religions are all the same, therefore, because you have to look also at how the people deal with the religion and what they do with it and how they elaborate it and so on. But this same Quran, which the standard legal practice of Islam is partly based on, although it's also largely based on the Hadith, also gave rise to such things as Jalaluddin Rumi, the poet of love, the Sufi poet of love, who is very popular in American pop culture right now and is widely read. Rumi, you probably have heard of him. There's various translations of his poems that are around. And so followers of Rumi have then a different way of looking at that than people who might take things with a more stern-minded type of attitude. And for the Christian side, it's not to be hidden from you that the same Bible that enjoined loving your enemies also was the text that was sworn by people who were burning the witches and practicing what today appears to be a narrow-minded and harsh Puritanism.
I can see why Christians and Jews might not have a lot there's some room for them not to be fearful, since they're considered people of the book and they're in a category of respect. But I'm wondering, since the only stated unforgivable sin is polytheism, what hope does the Quran give for a peaceful coexistence between Muslims and polytheists?
Well, okay. First we'll look at a text and then I'll answer your question. If we look at Surah 2, verse 62, for example, here we have page 33. Those who believe in the Quran and those who follow the Jewish scriptures and the Christians and the Sabaeans, any who believe in Allah and the last day and work righteousness, shall have their reward with their Lord. On them shall be no fear, nor shall they grieve. This same verse is repeated in Surah 5, verse 69, in a slightly abbreviated form. And this has given rise to an enormous amount of discussion and connects, of course, up with other texts as well. Now, it doesn't mention, of course, polytheists. Rather, it's still talking about monotheists. And whoever the Sabaeans are, which this commentator adopts a particular view of that, which is a historicizing type of view. But some other Muslim commentators leave it vague. And then it becomes a convenient way to include any other religions that the Muslims might encounter. Historically, however, Islam, when it encountered other religions, always accorded toleration to them, and that included Hinduism and Buddhism. And sometimes when military wars and conquests were going on, of course, the propriety wasn't always observed to the letter by everyone, but in the case of an established Muslim rule of any place, the other religions were permitted, and specifically Buddhism and Hinduism were permitted, and that in spite of the fact that there is no text that enjoins that. And that comes out of a hadith, which is a single solitary hadith that enjoins toleration for the Zoroastrians. It says, do not marry their women or eat their food, but take the tax from them and therefore protect them and permit them to worship. Because if they become Ahl al-Zimma, then they are under the Muslims' protection if the Muslims are the rulers of the place. That ruling for the Zoroastrians, who then are deemed not to be people of the book at the same level as the Jews and Christians are in Islamic law, nevertheless became applied to whoever else Islam might encounter. And Islam was the religion of rule in places where Buddhism and Hinduism existed. And when I teach world religions, I think, well, Hinduism does resemble ancient paganism in many respects. It resembles ancient Egyptian paganism. It resembles Greco-Roman paganism, so why not resemble Meccan paganism? But on the other hand, it's much too big, broad, wide, and diverse to be simply summed up as that. And it has in it various species of monism, and the idea that everything is part of the same, which is deity itself, and essential types of monotheism are taught in it as well. And so therefore Hinduism can also be seen as an authentic preaching which has had accretions creep into it, as is the case with the other non-Muslim religions, rather than as something that is prohibited.